This is an ABC News special report. Now reporting, David Muir.
Good evening, and we're coming back on the air at this hour with major developments in the special counsel's investigation into former President Donald Trump. ABC News has confirmed at this hour that Donald Trump and his lawyers have just been informed about 20 minutes ago that the former president needs to be at a federal court in Miami on Tuesday at 3 p.m. to be processed on federal charges. This, of course, would be the first president ever to be indicted on federal charges. I want to bring in several members of our investigative team, beginning with Catherine Faulders, our senior reporter. And Catherine, what are your sources telling you as far as the number of counts at this point and the range of what's being charged here?
David, we're learning from our sources that there appears to be at least 7 counts here. This ranges from everything from the willful retention of national defense information to conspiracy, to a scheme to conceal, to false statements and representations. Obviously, this is part of a more than years-long investigation by special counsel Jack Smith and Trump's efforts to obstruct the government, to give documents in his possession with classification markings back to government investigators who at multiple times throughout this investigation have tried to retrieve them from Trump. They still had questions about whether Trump still currently has classified documents in his possession. But again, we're learning that at this hour, we're told by our sources that there are at least 7 counts here, and they range from everything from willful retention of national defense information to conspiracy to concealing documents of record, David.
Catherine Faulders, our senior investigative reporter with our investigative unit, again reporting just moments ago that Donald Trump, the former president, and his lawyers have been told to appear in a federal court in Miami next Tuesday. 3 p.m. is the time we're told, but we're still reporting this out. Catherine's reporting so far at least 7 counts. Again, our team working on this. At least 7 counts ranging from obstruction to willful retention to conspiracy, also part of the initial reporting on what could be coming from the special counsel. I want to get right to our Chief Justice correspondent, Pierre Thomas, working his sources over at the Justice Department. And Pierre, what are you learning from the people you're talking with?
Well, David, we have been told by sources who have been following the case that Trump is expected to appear on Tuesday to be processed in connection with these charges. And we've been told by multiple sources that the special counsel has specifically been focusing on efforts to illegally retain classified documents and producing evidence to show that Trump also willfully obstructed the government's efforts to get those documents back. And David, I can put this in perspective. This is perhaps one of the most consequential investigations the Justice Department has done in recent memory. We're talking about investigating a former president who's seeking to be reelected. They knew this was one of the most consequential cases that they've ever pursued, and I'm told that they have built a case month by month to produce compelling evidence to lay out in detail what Trump did in terms of taking the documents from the White House and then what he did in response to a government subpoena to return those documents. Now, we're also being told that law enforcement and sources will be stepping up security in and around that courthouse in Miami because they don't know quite what the response will be. But again, clearly a very consequential moment, and we'll be hearing more in the coming hours and days, David.
Pierre, just stick with me here because I know your sources are telling you multiple counts. Catherine's reporting at least 7 counts at this hour. And Pierre, as you know, these counts range from obstruction, conspiracy, willful retention of documents pertaining to the national defense. What does this tell you? It would seem it involves more than just the former president when you hear conspiracy being listed as one of these potential multiple counts here.
When you look at the case that they previously laid out in terms of the affidavit for the search warrant, in terms of why they went in, it was clear that the government had indications that there were people working with the president to perhaps move documents, hide documents. There's a key moment that we've been reporting on for some weeks, David, where apparently after receiving the subpoena, Trump and his associates knew that federal prosecutors were going to come to Mar-a-Lago. And apparently there's surveillance footage from the room where some of these documents were being held, in which someone is seen taking the documents out the day before the prosecutors were supposed to get there. And also, David, here's another key thing. Well, you know that one of the attorneys for former President Trump issued a statement provided to DOJ saying, as far as they knew, all the documents had been provided. The FBI then gets a tip that there were still more documents there at Mar-a-Lago. And then when they did that consequential raid, they found more than 100 classified documents, David.
Okay, Pierre Thomas, as soon as you learn more from your sources, Pierre, just raise your hand there and we'll come right back to you. Again, at this hour, we are on the air, ABC News live coverage. Former President Donald Trump has been informed, he and his attorneys have been informed that the special counsel will hand down an indictment in this case after a months-long investigation lasting actually more than a year here into the handling of classified documents discovered at Mar-a-Lago. We are told at this hour multiple counts this involves. He's been told to appear in federal court 3 p.m. on Tuesday. I want to bring in John Santucci, also with the investigative unit. John, of course, covered Donald Trump for years when he was president. And John, as to be expected, we wondered if this would happen, and it has played out. The former president confirming himself that he and his attorneys have been informed. He writes that I have been indicted.
David, a very lengthy post from Donald Trump on his social media platform, Truth Social. It's extremely long. He goes on to say he never thought this was possible, calls it a dark day. But David, I can tell you from my sources that have been around the former president for much of the last week, they very much thought this was possible. They have been huddled in Bedminster, New Jersey, where the former president spends his summers, waiting for this today. They have been anxious. They were watching news coverage yesterday of Trump's former spokesperson, Taylor Buttigieg, going before that grand jury down in southern Florida. And David, that's a bit of a mystery to the Trump team. You know, they've been watching friends, allies, and now enemies of the former president go before a grand jury in Washington, D.C. that's been hearing the presentations by special counsel Jack Smith for the better part of a year. But only up until the last couple of days, few weeks even, did Team Trump learn about this other grand jury. And we believe, David, as we reported here on your show last night, it was when Team Trump received that target letter in just the last couple of weeks that they were told by special counsel Jack Smith that the former president was indeed a target of that investigation. I am told by my sources that the president for the last couple of days has just been waiting for this, knowing it was coming. He joked to one aide, another one, of course referring to his first indictment in Manhattan earlier this year. And we know that they are already planning a trip down to Miami, David. We are told from one source that they are looking at some sort of a campaign event around it, thinking that another indictment will do something better for Donald Trump's chances at a third bid at the White House.
I want to go back, John, to that one point you made. We reported here on World News Tonight just earlier this week about that letter that Donald Trump received, he and his lawyers. I think to a lot of our viewers, that would sound almost obvious after months and months of reporting on this investigation. But that was essentially their sort of official signal from the special counsel that this could very well be coming, and now it's played out tonight.
The official signal for sure, David. I mean, a target letter from a federal prosecutor lets you know that you are indeed just that. You are a target. We are looking to indict you on charges. But obviously, David, as you know, it's not a surprise. Between the many people that have gone before the grand jury, the many people that received document retention letters for subpoenas, and let's not forget, David, federal investigators have been to Donald Trump's home at Mar-a-Lago multiple times. And obviously the big one we all saw nearly a year ago, last August, where federal agents raided Mar-a-Lago looking for documents, looking for records. And as our team has reported, they found hundreds, David.
John Santucci, stick with us here. And again, John, as soon as you learn more, just let me know. We'll come back to you. I want to bring in our chief legal analyst, Dan Abrams, following all of this really every step of the way with us. And Dan, first question for you. When you hear that he's been told to show up Tuesday afternoon in federal court in Miami, in Florida, what does the venue tell you? What more can we glean from this?
So, one is in Washington, D.C.
We'll come back to John, and we'll come back to Dan Abrams in just a moment as soon as we get the audio figured out there. John Carl also standing by with me. John, our chief Washington correspondent. John, we know the venue will play a major role, but the question I wanted to ask you really is a much bigger picture here, because I don't want people to grow numb to these headlines that seem to come almost daily. This is something we have not seen before. The first time a former president has been indicted on federal charges. And again, it's the former president himself tonight who says, I have been told that I have been indicted.
David, it's truly an historic moment. Donald Trump, as you mentioned, the first president, former president of the United States, to be indicted on federal charges. This is also the second time a former president has been indicted, period. The first time was also Donald Trump, indicted on local charges. The Manhattan district attorney indicting him on charges related to hush money payments to Stormy Daniels. And we also know that a grand jury is very active in Fulton County, Georgia, looking to bring state charges against Donald Trump related to his efforts to overturn the presidential elections in the state of Georgia. So think about this, David. You have a former president of the United States, currently a candidate for president again, who is now under indictment on local and federal charges, and possibly soon also on state charges. Truly an historic moment, and compounded by the fact that as he campaigns now for the presidency for the third time to get back to the White House, he has made fighting back against these charges the centerpiece of his campaign. His campaign slogan at this point is, "I am your retribution." That is his message to his supporters. He tells his supporters that prosecutors are going after him because what they really want to do is go after them. So yes, he is battling for his political life here. He may be battling for his freedom. These are serious charges that could mean a serious jail time. But as he is doing it, he is making it the centerpiece of his presidential campaign.
And in the short term, John, it might help, cultivate support from the core group of supporters who continue to follow him and believe in him, at least in the short term. When you hear reports from John earlier, John Santucci and others, that he might hold a rally in Florida right around this Tuesday appearance in federal court. The short term, it might help, but over the long haul, when you talk about an indictment already here in New York City in the hush money case, and now a federal indictment from the special counsel Jack Smith, that is an unanswered question how the American people are going to feel and what they're going to think as they watch this unfold.
And how it affects him as a presidential candidate. In New York, they have set a trial date, David, for the end of March next year. That's in the midst of the Republican presidential primaries. We'll see what happens here. We know there's a court appearance, an initial court appearance next Tuesday. But when is this trial? And when potentially is a trial if there's an indictment in Georgia? He may be spending more time in courtrooms defending himself against, again, serious charges than he is able to spend on the campaign trail. So how will the American people respond to that? How will he campaign around that? And how do the other Republicans handle it? We now are seeing an increasingly crowded field of presidential candidates willing to stand up, Republicans, to stand up and say that they are going to run against Donald Trump, with the latest entrance to the race, and his own vice president and former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, once one of his most prominent supporters. So Republicans, not all of them for sure, but some prominent Republicans are now standing up and telling Republican voters that it is time to turn the page from the Trump era.
No question. The Republican campaigns are watching these developments very closely tonight and trying to decipher what their strategy is moving forward, how to handle all this. John, Carl, our thanks to you as always. Dan Abrams now with us, back with us on the phone here. Dan, a couple of really important legal questions to help guide our viewers at home. When you heard that this appearance is 3 p.m. Tuesday in Miami federal court, what does the venue tell you?
So that's a very significant point on where the crimes occurred. There are two grand juries. There's one in Washington, D.C., there's one in Florida. And one of the reasons that the one in Florida was so significant is because you generally have to charge a crime where it occurred. And they are alleging that these crimes occurred at Mar-a-Lago. And so that is why you have this grand jury in Florida. Now, I would say something else about the totality of the counts here. There were a lot of possible crimes that were being investigated here. Illegal retention of documents, the possible crime with regard to retaining national defense information, obstruction of justice being one of the most important ones. It seems, based on the information we have right now, that he's been charged in connection with all of them, that, in effect, the book has been thrown at him with regard to all of these counts. Now, the most significant thing we need to wait for is exactly what is the evidence? What do they have? There's been a lot of reporting out there about, possible audio tapes, possible witnesses who are going to come forward, possible people who were at Mar-a-Lago. The devil is going to be in the details here, I think, on convincing the American public one way or the other. It's very easy for people who are against Donald Trump to just celebrate the indictment. It is very easy for people who want to support Donald Trump to just say, well, this is a witch hunt. The critical point is going to be, what do they have? What's the proof? What's the evidence? What can they present in court? And that is the thing we're still going to have to wait for until we can see the specifics surrounding this indictment.
And Dan, so many people point to the other classified document cases that are front and center in the news as well. Mike Pence, classified documents found at his Indiana home. You remember I was interviewing him at his home right after news broke of the search at Mar-a-Lago, and I asked him if he took any classified documents with him when he left the White House, and he said no. He said it was a mistake publicly, and that he was surprised himself that documents were found. He's been cleared now. That was reported by us and other outlets in the last couple of days. And of course, there's this ongoing look at current President Biden, and the classified documents discovered in his possession along the way as well. Now, again, as you point out, Dan, it's going to be very important to see what they lay out, whether or not this is a speaking indictment once we see it, that will help explain the narrative of what they found to the American people, really on all sides of this, no matter where you stand. But at least initially, Dan, given the fact that Mike Pence was cleared, and that the special counsel in this case, a very different case, is moving forward federal charges. Just help viewers at home understand the very obvious differences just from the public reporting on these cases so far.
Yeah. Putting aside for a moment exactly what the documents were, putting aside making comparisons between which documents were more sensitive, et cetera. As a legal matter, it's the intentionality of the conduct. Remember, there was a subpoena here issued for specific documents with classified markings on them. That's what the subpoena said, a federal subpoena in May saying, hand over all of the documents that you have with classified markings. Prosecutors here, in effect, saying, not only did he not do that, but if there is a conspiracy charge here as well, they knew that they weren't doing it. They were intentionally not turning over these documents. We'll see what evidence they have, if any, of an intentional effort to hide documents. But it is the intentionality of the conduct that, as a legal matter, makes such a difference here between someone inadvertently, accidentally, mistakenly retaining a document, regardless of its level of classification. That'll be something else we'll have to think about, is there are different levels of classification. But it's the intentionality of the conduct that makes this completely different.
And let me ask you this, it might be a difficult question to answer at this point, Dan, but is there any sense of relief in Trump world in Bedminster tonight when they learn of the venue, that it will be Florida and not Washington, D.C., where he has to show up, given the fact that there has been some speculation, legal observers have said, that perhaps he would be able to sit before a slightly more sympathetic jury, if you will?
No doubt about it. No doubt that Donald Trump would rather have this case in Florida than in Washington, D.C. More sympathetic potential judges, more sympathetic potential jurors, a more sympathetic public in the whole in Florida. But, I don't think there was much choice here. I mean, if the prosecutors had a choice, meaning if they could just say, oh, well, we'd like to prosecute this in Washington, D.C., they would much prefer to prosecute it in Washington, D.C., for the same reason that Donald Trump would prefer it happen in Florida. But as a legal matter, it is the correct thing to do it in Florida, where the alleged crime occurred.
Dan Abrams, our chief legal analyst, with us here tonight following the breaking news at this hour that former President Donald Trump has been indicted. The former president acknowledging so himself through his social media tonight. And as we've reported here from the get-go, Catherine Fallers, the first to report that at least 7 counts, our investigative team believes. And again, we've put the categories of these charges up on the screen, though the exact detail we have yet to confirm, but broad range: obstruction, willful retention, conspiracy, expected to be part of these charges, these at least 7 counts, that the former president has been told to appear in federal court in Miami on Tuesday. As you heard Dan Abrams saying there, a lot of speculation that there might be some relief in Trump world, given that the venue will be in Florida, given his support from many in Florida. I want to bring in Aaron Katersky, who is in Florida as well tonight as we break this story. And Aaron, talk about, as you so carefully did when you were back here in Manhattan during the indictment involving the hush money case. This is obviously a much different level. These are federal charges. The first time we have ever seen this as a country, a former president indicted at the federal level. What will this country see play out come Tuesday afternoon when the former president has been told to show up?
A much different kind of case, David, but a very similar process. And once the former president arrives here at the federal courthouse in downtown Miami on Tuesday, it will mark an extraordinary moment for the United States, because Trump will be placed under arrest by the very government he was once elected to lead. Once he is formally arrested, Trump will be booked and processed as a federal defendant, and then he will appear before a judge to enter a not guilty plea to the criminal charges that you've outlined. And then perhaps we will understand the full scope of what the former president is facing and how potentially he may start to go about defending himself. All day today, we saw evidence that the grand jury had been nearing this moment, David. We saw members of special counsel Jack Smith's team going into and out of the room where the grand jury has been hearing evidence. Their exact process has been kept secret, but now we know it has culminated in this indictment, and the former president will be here on Tuesday to answer the charges, David.
An extraordinary scene the country will watch unfold come Tuesday. Aaron Katersky in Florida for us tonight. Aaron, thank you. I want to bring in our political director, Rick Klein. Rick, you know I always come back to you with this question, and the reason I do it is because I think this is a question people at home have every single time one of these headlines of this magnitude actually breaks involving the former president. This time, actually, we have never seen this, uncharted territory, but there's nothing that says that a former president who's been indicted at the federal level, charged, that he would not be able to run for office. And even if, and this is, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but even if there's some sort of conviction at the end of this long process, what are the ramifications if you're running for president?
Yeah, there is no federal law, there's no constitutional provision that allows, that prevents someone from running for president of the United States, even if they are currently behind bars. In fact, in 1920, we had a socialist candidate for president who was serving a prison sentence and got almost 1 million votes. You have to go back that far for any kind of precedent, and as you said, we're a long way from any of that. But look, there's also evidence that the last legal case brought against him may have bolstered his standing. Donald Trump only doing better in the primaries since then. Our poll from about a month ago, David, showed that about 54% of Americans thought that he deserved to face criminal charges in this case about classified documents. But that same poll had a numeric advantage for Trump versus Biden. So it may be that a lot of this information is already out there. And we saw Donald Trump tonight set a fundraising appeal within about 15 minutes of breaking the news of his own indictment. He is asking people to raise money. There's no doubt in my mind that it will be a successful appeal, because if we know anything about Donald Trump, is that his base is extremely loyal.
But again, the bottom line, Rick, that even though we're now witnessing a former president being indicted on federal charges at the federal level, he can still run for president. Nothing stops him.
Nothing stops him. It becomes practically harder because he has to make court dates. As John Carl was mentioning, the timeline here is very inconvenient, but he is allowed to run for president even while under indictment, even if he were to be convicted.
Rick Klein, our political director. Rick, thank you as always. I want to bring in Rachel Scott. She is live in Iowa, which tells you she's already out on the campaign trail covering the race for the White House. Rachel, I come to you because I know you've been reporting on all of the other Republican candidates. It's now a somewhat crowded field. We know that Mike Pence entered the fray this week officially. He went so far as to say his former boss should never be president again, should never be allowed to be president again. Chris Christie in the race as well, the former New Jersey governor, who right out of the gate took on Donald Trump and by name. I gather all of these campaigns tonight are watching this play out and deciding what their next steps will be and how far they'll go.
Exactly, David. But right now, I could tell you that most of this very crowded Republican field is walking a fine line. You heard Trump's own former vice president, Mike Pence, say that he's unfit to serve again, calling out the former president directly and by name when he launched his presidential campaign this week. But just hours ago, I had an opportunity to press Pence on whether or not a former president who is facing multiple investigations best represents the future of the Republican Party. And while Pence told me that he believes there needs to be new leadership, he says that an indictment would further divide the country, but still says that no one should be above the rule of law. You have former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. He says that an indictment does not look good for any political candidate, but is still waiting to see sort of how this all plays out. So far in this very crowded field of 12 Republican candidates, only one candidate, former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson, has come out and said that indictments of a former president should be enough reason for them to step aside. But we know that Trump is as defiant as ever. In fact, David, I could tell you right now his campaign is already fundraising off of this news.
Rachel Scott in Iowa, covering the race for president and what will undoubtedly be a very strong and powerful dynamic in the days, weeks, and months ahead, how all the other candidates now handle this who are trying to get that Republican nomination and having to get through Donald Trump to get there. I want to bring in Terry Moran tonight. And Terry, it's a question I haven't been able to ask anyone yet, and this is bigger picture when it comes to the special counsel here, Jack Smith. There has been so little that's been leaked from this special counsel investigation. Of course, we haven't even heard from him. When you see the range of charges, and I've been really careful here because obviously we don't have the document in front of us. We just know at least 7 counts. We know the range of these charges. But when you see how significant these charges are, and a special counsel who knows the weight of history here in this decision, what does that say about the evidence they may or may not have?
To me, David, it shows that this prosecutor, Jack Smith, must believe that he has the evidence to make these convictions, because he knows this target is unprecedented in our history. And he has demonstrated by not whispering a word to the press, that office just did not leak, that he would do it by the book and amass this evidence with care, with the rigor that is expected of federal prosecutors, and that he has a reputation for, because that's the only way this thing becomes normal. And by that I mean it is an extraordinary, historic circumstance, the indictment of a former president by the Justice Department that he once led, as Aaron pointed out. But it is going to become an ordinary criminal case in federal court. It must, for justice to be done equally. There are hundreds, more than 1,500 done every year, and what we can expect is he will have access to all of the documents, Donald Trump will, and all of the evidence that will be used against him, as any other criminal defendant is. He has a right to a speedy trial in 70 days if he wants it, or he might waive it. This is the saving grace of the American system, is that it will get put into the courts, where the people who do this every day for a living, including Trump's own lawyers, are going to handle it the way every other case is handled. That is the only way that the country will have confidence in the outcome of this case, no matter how it goes. But what this tells me is that Jack Smith has done his homework and is ready to proceed now, no matter who the target is.
And as we focus on Jack Smith here for a moment, Terry, thank you. I want to bring back in Pierre Thomas, who has just learned from his sources that this will be, and you heard me mention this earlier, this question of whether or not this would be a speaking indictment, which essentially means, will the special counsel lay out in narrative detail what they've uncovered and why they believe what they've uncovered is truly significant here? And Pierre, you've learned that's exactly what they plan to do?
David, I've been told to expect a speaking indictment to lay out chapter and verse what took place, because they understand that this is a historic case. They understand who's involved, and they know that they have a responsibility to give the American public explicit detail of what they know. Now, I've been talking to sources for months and weeks now, and they have told me that the evidence amassed by the FBI is compelling and in some cases devastating. And one of the things that we can see by the conspiracy charges, although we've not yet seen the specifics, is that that speaks to the fact that there were other people allegedly working with Trump to conceal and keep these documents from the federal government. And The key here is that some of those people likely have become witnesses, David.
Pierre, thank you. I want to bring back in Dan Abrams because, Dan, I know so much of this depends on the venue, the judge who oversees all of this as it plays out. But is there a chance, and I'm asking for those who are watching at home, is there a chance that this all plays out during this election cycle so that voters can witness the evidence, witness what a potential jury finds in this case? Could we see this done actually before the 2024 election?
I think it's likely that it would happen before the 2024 election. But remember, a lot of that power remains with the defendant himself. The defendant has a lot of ability to delay or move things more quickly if he wants. So we're going to have to see exactly what Donald Trump decides and his legal team that they want to do about the timing here. But no question that this could all be tried and resolved before the November 2024 election.
And again, we always talk political calculation when it comes to Donald Trump, but we're talking about very serious charges here, Dan Abrams. He also has to take into account the real possibility that with these kinds of charges, you're talking about the potential prison time possibilities here if there's a conviction.
Absolutely. And I think this is a very different case than the New York case, both factually and politically. I think that we talk a lot about, well, there was the New York case also. I really do believe that case becomes secondary to this case. This one becomes much more significant. If Jack Smith has the kind of evidence that Pierre is talking about, it becomes a much more overwhelming one. And this is where politics and law intersect. Maybe in this case, they can convince the public as well.
Dan Abrams, our thanks to you. And for those of you watching, as we learned, we came on the air shortly after 7 o'clock Eastern. A former president, Donald Trump, has been indicted on federal charges. The first time we've ever seen this, at least 7 counts. Our coverage continues. ABC News Live, abcnews.com. We go back to programming. Good night.
This has been a special report from ABC News.
Hi everyone, George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.